Our next presenter is Carol Donaldson. Carol is the Manager of Clinical Education, St John Ambulance, West Australia. She'll tell us about ongoing training and quality improvement of high-performance CPR. In addition to her role with St John, Carol represents the College of Pre-Hospital Care on a number of internal and external committees, including the West Australian branch of Australian Resuscitation Committee. Carol has also been involved with St John's WA and Paramedics Australasia in the partnership that's developing, leading to the transition proposed for 2018 for the paramedics registration. Carol has 20 years' experience as a registered nurse in the UK and WA, including military nursing, and work as a nurse practitioner. Please welcome Carol Donaldson.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd just like to thank the organisers for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about some of the initiatives in education that we're implementing at St John Ambulance in WA to support those 10 steps in resuscitation outcomes. Predominantly today I'm going to look at step 3, which is good quality CPR by all of our operational staff. So we've heard the themes of obviously measuring our performance to improve our outcomes and an organisational wide perspective. So they are equally as important when we talk about that for education. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background of our operational staff in WA. I realise you're all from different ambulance jurisdictions. So we have ambulance officers who are volunteers in our rural and remote communities. They can just form purely volunteer crews, or they can work with our career paramedics. We have transport officers in our metropolitan areas that predominantly have low key or low acuity patients, taking them to clinic appointments, etc. They're often not called to resuscitation, but if they're the closest crew, they can be called to a CPR event. And then we have our metro crews, and they're comprised of paramedics of all differing levels, so paramedics on road, as well as our clinical support staff and our ambulance managers. And we've got a very unique model for our undergraduate education in that we actually employ student ambulance officers, so that's their second year of their undergraduate degree, so they form part of our crew. So they're actually exposed to cardiac arrest very early on, even before they've completed their degree. So it's a very unique style of education. So St John Ambulance WA has a very strong focus on resuscitation, and we ensure that pre-employment all of our operational staff have completed a first aid course. So that introduces them to the concept of CPR very early on and giving back to the community. Each year, all of our operational staff, and by that I also mean all of our call takers in our State Operations Centre, have 2 days of mandatory updates, so they're continual professional development. And we cover resuscitation training during those 2 days, depending on their scope of practice, whether that be adult, paediatric and newborn. So we look at all of those systems there. We also have incorporated the CPR for our call takers, and the reason for that is they are obviously, we've heard from Toby about them identifying the CPR early, that we've got an arrested patient, and talking through that CPR process with the person that's calling at the other end. So for them to actually do CPR and get feedback on their performance, as actually they've fed back to us, is really important for them to understand what's happening at the other end, okay? Not just for the first responders, but also for our crews when they arrive. So we talked about measuring our performance for improvement. So we have the performance and planning team. So we have data analysts. We're very, very fortunate to have that in our organisation. And we also have pre-crew, which is the pre-hospital resuscitation and emergency care unit, which is headed by Professor Judith Finn at Curtin University. So we share data with them about our resuscitation, and also then they analyse that data and feed that back to us. So about 3 or 4 years ago now, we implemented this idea of IDA, information, decision and action. So our metropolitan crews, our operational crews, management team, education and clinical governance all sit on different levels of that IDA team. So we look at the data about our performance in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So that's the information side of things. We then make decisions about how that is going, and then obviously we put actions in place to improve that process. So when we make an intervention at one of these IDA meetings, we actually date stamp it. So we actually record when we've made that intervention, whether that be an operational intervention, education or a clinical intervention, so we can then measure those outcomes that we're actually improving, or perhaps those interventions haven't worked. So it's a really informative process, and it's very, very structured. And we get that from grassroots levels, so our IDA level 2s from the guys on road, as well as level 3 and much higher into our executive level 4 areas. So, education. This year we were tasked with one of our clinical indicators to improve cardiac arrest outcomes, and we were concentrating on good quality CPR. So the education team in the College of Pre-Hospital Care were tasked with looking at innovative ways of how we actually achieve this. So we wanted to implement something that was real life. So if we're in the college, it's a nice, organised environment. There's no rain, it's nicely lit, it's very easy to educate somebody in that environment. But we wanted to look at how we make it a higher fidelity, what it's actually like out there in the real world when it can sometimes be quite chaotic, the patient's actually not easily accessible, dimly lit, 3 in the morning. So we wanted to incorporate all of that into our training. So, to enhance all of the survival, although we're concentrating on CPR, the organisation as a whole, we're looking at leadership as well around that CPR, as well as all of those 10 steps that were spoken about with our previous speakers. So we're actually, we have actually developed an app now where all of our first aid individuals who want to volunteer within a 500-metre radius to respond to CPR can actually download that app and respond there. We're also looking at the call takers. We use a Pro QA system, which is quite a rigid system for answering questions. So we're looking at that on how we identify the arrested patient early and how we dispatch crews quickly. And Toby's just spoken about that in his presentation. I'm obviously concentrating on good quality CPR for all of our operational staff, not just our paramedics. And then there's that link with the research and data with the hospital environment, for the out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. So, as educators, we're going to concentrate on step 3, which is that good quality CPR by our emergency medical crews. So we are very much a support service to our operations team, both country and metropolitan, and we work very closely with our clinical governance team around the guidelines for resuscitation. And we wanted to transfer real good quality CPR into that normal environment. So we wanted something that was quite objective. For any educators in the room, have we got many educators in the room? Just a show of hands. Okay, so we know first of all how difficult it is to engage certain personnel. There are always those personnel that are very happy to engage in education and some who aren't. And to give feedback about their performance sometimes is difficult. We actually second paramedics from our metro area to be trainers in delivering education in the College of Pre-Hospital Care. And often if they give feedback that perhaps isn't perceived as being what the operator thought it should be, then it's quite difficult for them to take that on board. So we wanted something quite objective that individual could see, that real-time feedback that's objective. So we started implementing the feedback systems. So we had some electronic software that we used for our transport officers and volunteers that was both visual and auditory, that fed back the information of how good their CPR was. And in a second I'll talk through the QCPR that we use for our paramedics. So there's no argument with the trainer and the operator. They can visually see, and obviously there's an auditory prompt of how well they're doing with their CPR. We also acknowledge that skills attrition, usually after 2 months of education, if they're not implementing those skills in the clinical environment, often they lose those skills. So we needed to find a way to reinforce the skills. As I've said, every 2 years, and I'm sure every year, we get 2 days of professional development, and I'm sure that's the same for most ambulance jurisdictions. Really wasn't enough to expose our staff to this. We looked at some stats, and on average, our crews actually attend around 4 to 5 resuscitations within a year. It depends, obviously, where the depots are to how much exposure they have. So we were tasked with looking at how we could do that. I said we wanted to recreate what is the real world. So when we were doing the training, we actually didn't just do it in a classroom. We went outside, we did little excursions into areas where the weather wasn't good, where the light was poor, so they had to use obviously the lights on the top of the vehicle. We also did CPR on the move, so moving downstairs, as was alluded to earlier. Yeah, the guidelines are great, but they don't tell us how to extricate the patient and do quality CPR when we're actually extricating. And we also did it in the back of the vehicle. So we tried to recreate that real world as much as we could. And we also did that with our mannequins that were pregnant, yeah, so big pregnant bellies, etc., not just the normal average ones. So we also developed an app with our IT department around augmented reality, and that's something that's ongoing at the moment. So apart from just giving the feedback with the QCPR and the electronic software, we wanted to create what does a patient look like who's cyanosed, what does lividity look like, all of those things that our staff may not have been exposed to prior to coming into the organisation. So we developed the app that's used on an iPad. We use triggers on our mannequins, so there's certain little triggers that we use, and they hover the iPad over there, and then they can see either a 2D or 3D object that shows them what lividity may look like or cyanosis. So it just adds to the fidelity of the simulation exercise, just trying to make it that real world environment. So to provide as much exposure as we could, we looked at drop-in sessions for our staff. So our headquarters is based within the metropolitan area, so we had drop-in sessions for staff who were off duty, and then we also decided we were going to have drop-in sessions north and south of our paramedic metro area of HQ, so one depot in the north, one depot in the south. So we did that biannually, and the uptake rate initially was fairly good. We'd have about 7 or 8 personnel turning up for the drop-in sessions to go through the CPR process. However, we found we needed to advertise it frequently to remind the staff that this was available, and we did see a trend in the drop of those people coming in on their days off, dropping in to do the education. There's also this year a very strong emphasis on leadership. So again, our speakers this morning spoke about those human factors, about leading the team, not just the technical skills that we need to perform, but actually how do we get that big picture view of what's actually going on, the situational awareness, how do we extricate, how do we get them to hospital quickly. So that's now all been implemented into that education training around resuscitation. It's a totally different concept for our guys to think about. Normally, obviously, we have backup crews, so there are 4 people on scene for a resuscitation, and then we'll probably have an area manager or a clinical support worker that will go along and actually assist with that resuscitation. So it's about coordinating those human factors, delegation of tasks, making sure that we're situationally aware of what's happening, and as I say, a huge mindset change for our crews. So we wanted to implement the education that also fitted with all of our learning styles. So the kinematics, those people who like visual and auditory styles, and this feedback system with the QCPR ticked all of those boxes. So let's have a look at these computer-aided softwares that we had. So our transport officers and our volunteer ambulance officers, they use AEDs, all right? So they don't have the QCPR puck that I'll talk about in a second. So we used a Palm software where when they were performing CPR, they could actually see visually how far their chest compressions, the depth, the rate, and how much time they were spending off the chest. So again, it was a confidence thing for these individuals. They didn't often attend a resuscitation attempt, so it was about them having the confidence that what they were doing was actually correct, that instant feedback. But in 2014, St John Ambulance WA, we implemented the Philips MRX defibrillator, and we decided to also opt for the QCPR puck. So for those of you who are unaware of what the QCPR puck is, it's a small item that adheres to the sternum of the patient, and you actually perform the compressions through the QCR puck. So the operator gets instant visual and auditory feedback, not just from the puck as they're looking down on the chest, but also on the screen of the MRX, around the depth of their compressions, the recoil, which we know from research is really important for filling of the heart, also the rate of compressions, their time spent off the chest, and their ventilations. And it also provided that data to our clinical governance team around, obviously, quality improvement processes. And with the use of the augmented reality app, we enhance the fidelity of what we call our SimExes, our simulated exercises with our monitors. So it's mandatory to use the puck, and initially the uptake of compliance was fairly good, about 48% of our staff on road. That has declined over the last year. So we are actually looking at that data now to look at why that might be, and obviously to make that intervention again to measure improvements in the compliance of using the puck on road. So the exposure, as I've said, all of our emergency medical response teams, including our call takers, annually have updates, right? All on adult, and obviously for our paramedics, paediatric and the newborn. So we also looked at the drop-in sessions that I've spoken to you about, and we engaged our clinical support paramedics who have a support role on road, and we equipped them with toolboxes. So we gave them the equipment to go out there to the depots and have an actual structured education session ad hoc with those staff who said, you know what, I haven't seen a resource for a while, I'd really like an update in it. Yeah, so during their downtime, they would go out and they'd do some education there as well. So apart from us in the college doing that, our clinical support paramedics also did that. We also looked at our adverse incidents, reporting systems through our audits, and with the case sheets perhaps where we had suboptimal performance of CPR, again through that IDA process we offered supplemental training to those officers if required to increase the actual use of the puck and also obviously their CPR performance. And although we acknowledge that devices, the feedback devices, aren't advocated by the Australian Resource Council, they do provide us with instant feedback and correction on suboptimal CPR to the operator, and especially those who are new to the service or haven't seen a resource for a while. And what we have found with our officers returning to operational duties from maternity leave or from injury is its confidence for those guys. Yeah? So that instant feedback gives them the confidence to know they can still do it. All right? They may not have performed CPR for 2 years. So again, it's just that upskilling and confidence for them. So I've got a very short video now just demonstrating those feedback systems.
Alright, Tracy, just like to check your hand position and your depth. Centre of the sternum with your middle finger in line with the nipple. Good. And just looking at the feedback device there, if you just try to get a little bit deeper. Rate could be a little bit faster and just your depth a little bit more with those compressions. Just try and keep all those lights green. Looking about 100 compressions a minute, so we're so I have to just increase that rate a little bit. Alright Trace, so for this one we're going to be using our CPR puck. So this is a great little tool that we use out on road. It will also give us the feedback of our depth of compressions and rate. So it's really important we put it in the correct position. So the correct position for that one is it lining up just the centre of the device with the nipples of our mannequin here. Centre of sternum, how does that look for you?
A little bit off centre. There.
Fantastic. Alrighty, so if you want to just get on there and give it a go, we'll give similar feedback and we'll just have a look at the actual screen here and that will give us real-time feedback as well as the monitor there if that's more comfortable for you. Really good. I think we could just increase the rate a little bit now. Fantastic. So we're just getting the feedback here. So every time we see a little white line up top of there, it means we're doing a great job. Really good. Just careful with your rate there. It's just dropping down a little bit.
Okay, so you saw the two techniques used there. One, first of all, that we use with our transport crews with that feedback, and then you saw the CPR pucking process. Paramedics tend to be quite competitive individuals, so anything that they compete against each other is good to get that feedback, obviously. We also have a trainer who supervises them. You heard the trainer there, encouraging them, watch, get the green lights, get used to the rhythm, get used to the depth of compressions, okay? So that was in our classroom environment, so we'll start off there and then we'll take them into more challenging environments with dim light, etc., to perform what is essentially the real world situation. Okay, so I don't know whether we've got time for questions. No, you're saying no? Okay, so thank you very much. I'll take questions whenever. Okay.